They say life has a strange way of revealing your worth, not in moments of perfection, but in the cracks you try so hard to hide. This is the story of Ethan, a quiet man who never saw himself as special. He worked in a small pottery studio in a silent village tucked between the hills, a place where time moved slowly and dreams often faded with the evening light. Every morning, he opened the dusty doors, cleaned the shelves, and stared at the rows of perfect clay pots lined neatly in front of him. Each one flawless, smooth, balanced. And then there was his, a single pot with a deep, visible crack running down its side, the one he'd accidentally dropped during his training years ago. He never had the heart to throw it away. It sat on the lowest shelf, half hidden behind the others, a constant reminder of failure. Ethan would often glance at it as he worked, thinking, maybe I was never meant to make anything beautiful. He had talent, yes, but not the confidence to see it. And in a world that only celebrated perfection, his eyes only saw what was broken. One afternoon, as the golden light of sunset painted the workshop, an old man entered. He was a traveler. Calm eyes, silver beard, and the kind of presence that made even silence feel alive. He looked around the studio, nodding at the craftsmanship, until his eyes landed on that broken pot. He pointed at it gently and asked, "Who made that one?" Ethan hesitated. "It was me, but it's cracked. I kept it only as a reminder of what not to do." The old man smiled. "Would you sell it to me?" Ethan blinked. "Sir, that one's useless. It can't even hold water properly." The man chuckled softly. "Maybe that's why I want it." Reluctantly, Ethan handed over the broken pot. He didn't ask for money. He just felt embarrassed. That evening, he went home wondering why anyone would want something so imperfect. Days passed. Then, one morning, as Ethan walked to the marketplace, he saw the same traveler again, sitting near a small garden outside the village. In front of him was the same broken pot, placed on a narrow path beside wildflowers. But something was different. As Ethan got closer, he noticed that the path beside the pot was covered in blossoms, red, white, and yellow, stretching far into the distance. The other side of the path, dry and bare. The old man looked up and smiled. "You see, my friend, every morning I fill this pot with water and walk down this path. The crack on its side lets a little water spill, just enough to feed the seeds I planted months ago." Ethan's eyes widened as he stared at the trail of living color. Every step of loss had given life. Every drop that leaked had nourished something unseen. The old man continued, "You call it broken. I call it useful in its own way. Without that crack, there would be no flowers." That moment changed Ethan. He realized he'd been measuring his worth by what he lacked, not by what he gave. He thought the world wanted perfection, but maybe the world just needed authenticity. When he returned to his workshop that day, he didn't look at his cracked pot with shame anymore. He placed it on the top shelf, not to hide, but to remind himself that sometimes what makes us imperfect is exactly what makes us valuable. That night, he whispered to himself, "Maybe my cracks are where my purpose leaks out." He didn't become famous overnight. He didn't suddenly feel unbreakable. But he started seeing beauty differently, in the scars on his hands, in the uneven glaze of his work, and even in his doubts. Because now he understood perfection doesn't inspire people. Honesty does. Soft cinematic pause, emotional tone rises. Ethan's story is not about pottery. It's about life. We spend years trying to hide the parts of ourselves that feel unworthy, our mistakes, our regrets, our fears. But sometimes those are the very things that make us who we are. Like that cracked pot, your flaws might be watering someone else's garden, in ways you can't even see yet. After that day, something inside Ethan shifted. He didn't know what to call it. Peace, clarity, maybe both. But for the first time in years, he walked back to his studio not as a man ashamed of his flaws, but as someone curious about them. He stared at that broken pot on the top shelf, sunlight gliding across its crack like a golden river, and whispered, "If a crack can bring beauty to the world, maybe my mistakes can too." The next morning, Ethan did something he hadn't done in months. He opened the workshop earlier than usual, lit a candle, and started shaping new clay. But this time he didn't chase perfection. He shaped freely, letting the clay move with his hands, letting small imperfections live in the surface. He didn't smooth them out. He didn't hide them. He let them breathe, and as the hours passed, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: joy. The same clay that once felt heavy now danced under his fingers. He smiled, remembering the traveler's words. Without the crack, there would be no flowers. Soon, Ethan's pots began to change. They weren't flawless. In fact, many of them had small, uneven ridges or faint lines. But there was something special about them, something raw, alive, human. People started noticing. At first, it was just a few curious buyers at the market. They would pick up his pots and ask, "Why does this one have a mark on the side?" Ethan would smile and say softly, "Because every piece tells a story, and just like us." And somehow that answer always made them smile too. His work began to sell, not because it was perfect, but because it made people feel something. Months passed. Ethan's name began to spread beyond his small village. Travelers came to see the potter who made beauty from mistakes. But Ethan never forgot what started it all. That single broken pot. He kept it on his window, filled with water and wildflowers, the same kind that grew along the traveler's path. Every morning he would touch its cracked side and whisper, "Thank you for breaking me open." But then, one evening, something unexpected happened. A young boy entered his workshop, timid, eyes filled with sadness. He was about 10, carrying a small clay pot in his hands, broken into 2 pieces. He looked at Ethan and said, "Sir, my father told me to make this at school, but I dropped it. Can you fix it? He'll be angry if he sees." Ethan took the pot carefully, his eyes soft. He could see the fear in the boy's trembling fingers, the same fear he once lived with. He smiled and said, "Do you want me to fix it? Or make it beautiful?" The boy looked confused. "Isn't that the same thing?" Ethan chuckled. "Not always." He showed the boy the old cracked pot sitting by the window. "See this? It broke years ago. but I learned to fill its crack with something that shines. He took out a small jar of gold resin, a method called kintsugi, the art of repairing pottery with gold. As he brushed the resin into the cracks, the broken lines turned golden, glowing softly under the evening light. The boy's eyes widened. "Wow, it's even prettier now." Ethan nodded slowly. "Exactly. Sometimes what's broken isn't ruined. It's just waiting to be transformed." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He thought about the boy, the pot, and how pain, when embraced, turns into wisdom. He realized something profound. Maybe every person who walks through his doors carries a crack no one sees. And maybe, just maybe, it was his purpose to remind them that they were never less because of it. He began teaching classes, not about how to make perfect pottery, but how to make meaningful pottery. He would tell his students, "Perfection is a mask, but truth connects hearts." And every student who sat in that little studio began to see their own reflection in the clay. One woman whispered through tears, "I've spent years hiding my scars. Maybe they're part of my beauty." Another said, "My mistakes destroyed me once, but now they define me." Ethan would smile quietly, because he understood, when you stop hiding your cracks, you give others permission to love theirs too. One day, years later, Ethan walked along that same path where he'd met the old traveler. The wildflowers were still blooming, brighter than ever. And though the old man was gone, Ethan felt his presence in the wind. He knelt down, touching the petals softly, and whispered, "You were right. The cracks weren't my weakness. They were the proof that I could still hold light." As the sun dipped below the hills, he realized something else. The pot he once called broken had been his teacher all along. It had taught him patience, humility, and grace. It had shown him that beauty doesn't fade when life breaks you. It transforms, glows, and finds new purpose through the cracks. Soft piano swells. Slow emotional tone shift to reflection. Voice softens. So if you're listening right now, wondering if you're enough, if your past mistakes have made you unworthy, remember Ethan's pot. You don't have to be perfect to have purpose. You don't have to shine without cracks. Sometimes your broken pieces are the only way light can escape. He ended his life not as a master potter, but as a storyteller through clay, a man whose every creation carried the message he once needed to hear. You are not broken. You are becoming. Final cinematic pause. Fade out tone. We all have cracks. Moments we wish we could erase. Stories we wish we could rewrite. But what if those cracks are where our truth lives? What if your pain is the proof that you're still growing? And what if your scars are just gold in disguise? So the next time you look at yourself and think, "I'm not enough," remember the flowers that only bloomed because a pot was broken. After that day, Ethan began to live differently. The pot with the crack, once a symbol of his failure, had become his daily reminder of purpose. Every morning, he'd touch it gently before beginning his work and whisper to himself, "Let the world see beauty through my cracks." He started making new pots. Not perfect, but unique. Each one told a story. Some had uneven edges, some carried marks of his hands, and people started noticing something different in his creations. They weren't flawless, but they were alive. Soon, word began to spread in nearby villages about the potter who shaped feelings, not just clay. Ethan felt peace for the first time in years. But as fate often does, peace came only to prepare him for his next test. One day, a merchant from the city arrived. He was known for exporting fine pottery, polished, symmetrical, and elegant. He walked into Ethan's small studio, looked around, and said, "You have talent. But your work, it's rough. I can make you successful, but you'll have to change your style." Ethan hesitated. "Change?" he asked softly. The merchant nodded. "People want perfection. I'll pay you well, but I want clean lines, glossy finishes, no marks, no cracks." "Beauty sells when it's perfect." The offer was tempting. A life of comfort, money, recognition, everything Ethan had once dreamed of. But as the merchant's words echoed in the quiet room, Ethan's eyes fell on the broken pot again. The same one that had taught him the meaning of worth. His heart whispered, "If I hide my truth again, I'll lose the peace I just found." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by his workbench, staring at the clay under his hands, caught between two voices, the voice of ambition and the voice of authenticity. The storm inside him raged. He thought of all the years he'd struggled, the days of hunger, the loneliness, the quiet evenings filled with doubt. Wasn't this what he had wanted? Success? But then a thought crossed his mind. What's the point of reaching the top if I have to bury who I really am to get there? He closed his eyes and imagined the path of flowers the old man had shown him, that line of life born from imperfection. That wasn't perfection. That was truth. The next morning, when the merchant returned, Ethan stood tall, quiet but steady. "Sir," he said calmly, "I'm grateful for your offer. But I can't shape perfection if it costs me my purpose. My hands tell stories. My work may not shine like the city's pottery, but it carries life, fingerprints, flaws, and truth. That's the beauty I want to share." The merchant stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You'll never grow if you stay small." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe growth isn't always upward. Maybe sometimes it's deeper." The merchant left without another word. Weeks passed. Ethan continued his work and pouring himself into every piece. He taught local children the art of pottery, not just how to shape clay, but how to find meaning in their mistakes. "Don't fix every flaw," he'd say. "Learn to listen to it. Every mark has a reason." His workshop slowly filled again, not with perfect pots, but with stories. People from nearby villages started bringing their broken items, asking Ethan to repair them or make something new out of them. He would take each piece gently and smile. "Let's see what your crack wants to become." It became more than pottery. It became healing. One rainy afternoon, as he was helping a young boy reshape a chipped vase, the old traveler returned, the same man who had once bought his broken pot. He looked older now, but his eyes were still kind and alive. He placed the same pot, now covered in tiny moss and small flowers, on Ethan's table and said, "It's time it came home." Ethan smiled in disbelief. "You kept it all these years?" The man nodded. "It reminded me every day not to chase perfection, but to water what matters." He looked around at Ethan's studio, full of students, laughter, life, and said softly, "I see you found your worth." Ethan bowed his head, his voice trembling. "No, sir. I just stopped hiding it." Music rises, emotional tone deepens. The rain kept falling outside, tapping softly against the window. And in that sound, Ethan felt something powerful. Peace. Not the peace that comes from success, but the peace that comes from acceptance. He realized now, your worth doesn't decrease because someone fails to see it. Your light doesn't dim just because someone else prefers darkness. Your cracks don't make you broken. They make you real. That day, as he stood in his small, warm studio, surrounded by laughter, imperfection, and the smell of clay, Ethan finally understood. We are all like those pots. We are all a little cracked, a little uneven, but through those cracks, our light escapes. And that's how the world truly sees us. Years passed, and the little pottery studio in the hills became more than just a workplace. It became a sanctuary, a place where people came not only to mold clay, but to reshape their spirits. Ethan had grown older now. His hair had turned silver, but his hands still held the same gentleness, the same patience that once shaped his own healing. Every morning, as the first light of dawn touched the shelves, he'd look at the old cracked pot sitting near the window, the same one that started it all. A thin line of sunlight always passed right through the crack, scattering golden patterns across the room. And every time Ethan smiled quietly, that pot was no longer a reminder of weakness. It was a symbol of truth, that sometimes the most beautiful things in life are born from what once broke us. One evening, a young woman entered his studio. Her name was Lena. She looked tired, not from work, but from life. She told Ethan she wanted to learn pottery, but when he handed her the clay, she just stared at it blankly. After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't think I can make anything beautiful. Everything I touch feels like it falls apart." Ethan looked at her, and for a moment, he saw himself from years ago. That same quiet pain, that same self-doubt. He gently placed the old cracked pot in front of her and said, "This one was once broken too. Do you think it's useless now?" Lena studied it carefully. "No," she said softly. "It's beautiful, different." Ethan smiled. "That's the secret. You don't fix a crack by hiding it. You fill it with purpose." He handed her the clay again and said, "Make something, anything. Don't worry if it breaks. Sometimes the pieces tell the story better than the whole." As days turned into weeks, Lena began to shape her first pots. At first, they were rough, uneven, but Ethan never corrected her. He'd only say, "Let the clay speak. It knows what it wants to become." Slowly, she started to see beauty in her imperfections. She'd run her fingers over every line, every dent, and smile. One day, she told Ethan, "It's strange. I used to think my mistakes defined me. Now I see they're just part of my shape." Ethan laughed softly. "Then you've learned the real art, not pottery, but peace." That night, after everyone left, Ethan sat alone in his studio, candlelight flickering across the shelves of pots. He picked up his first cracked creation once more and thought about how life had come full circle. He whispered to himself, "This crack gave life. It gave me peace, and now it gives others hope. He realized something profound. His story was never just about him. It was about every soul that had ever felt unworthy. Every person who had ever looked at their scars and thought, "I am not enough." He finally understood. Our worth doesn't come from being flawless. It comes from being true. Years later, people still tell the story of the potter who taught peace. Children who once learned under Ethan's guidance grew up to carry his message forward. Lena became a teacher herself. Her studio's sign read, "We don't hide the cracks here. We let the light through." And on one quiet morning, long after Ethan's hands had shaped their last piece of clay, the villagers found the old pot still sitting on the windowsill. The sunlight still passed perfectly through its crack, scattering warmth across the room. It was as if the pot itself whispered the words Ethan had once lived by. The light that shines through your cracks is the light that shows others the way. If you ever doubt your worth, remember this: you don't need to be perfect to be valuable. You don't need to shine like others to be bright. Sometimes your smallest imperfection is carrying the biggest purpose. Quietly, beautifully, faithfully, you are not broken. You are becoming.